Welcome, everybody, to the Fretboard Journal podcast. I am your host, Jason Verlinde, the publisher of the Fretboard Journal magazine. You are hearing the one and only John Rauhaus in the background, about to become Arizona Music Hall of Fame inductee. Congratulations, John. And today I get to do what is one of my absolute favorite things to do here at the Fretboard Journal, whether it's in the pages of our magazine, on this podcast, or at our Fretboard Summit. I get to introduce you to something that I think probably isn't on your radar quite yet, but that I know you will all love. Today, I am introducing you to an amazing young singer-songwriter named Sofia Wolfson. She has actually started writing for the Fretboard Journal. She is a writer. She's a singer-songwriter. She's a guitar geek, and she's one of my favorite people. And she just put out what I think is one of the greatest records of 2024, Imposing on a Hometown. If anyone out there enjoys the music of Phoebe Bridgers or Margaret Glaspie, I think you will love this record. It's kind of her debut record, although she did actually put out a record when she was only 16 years old, way back when. There are a bunch of great musicians on this record beyond Sofia, many of whom have actually appeared in the pages of the magazine or on this very podcast, folks like Mason Stoops and Harrison Whitford. The record is available now on all the streaming platforms. Please go check it out and then hear Sofia's story on this podcast and look for her writing in future Fretboard Journals. Our 54th issue is starting to mail. You'll see Sofia's contribution in our 55th issue, which is going to be mailing out later this summer. And then I would be remiss if I didn't remind you all that on August 23rd, we're throwing pretty much the coolest guitar gathering around in Chicago at the Old Town School of Folk Music. It's called the Fretboard Summit. Blake Mills is going to be there. Joe Henry's going to be there. We've got Colin Hay performing as well, and Valerie June, and about 80 guitar makers from around the world, including some bigger brands like Collings and Yamaha and Martin, and some folks who just build 5 or 10 guitars a year and do it at the absolute top of their craft. It's unlike any guitar show you've ever heard of or attended in that you don't need to have your checkbook ready to buy a guitar to have a great time. We have dozens of hours of workshops and panel discussions and live podcasts and secret parties and fun, goofy things that are meant just for fellow guitar people. We also have workshops and masterclasses and ways to learn about guitar collecting and guitar playing. It's unlike any guitar gathering I've ever been to, and I've been to quite a bunch of them, and I do it all with the Fretboard Journal listener and reader in mind, so I hope you will sign up. Tickets are $400. It covers everything. You get to go into every concert. You get a seat at everything. You get to go to all the parties. I think a bunch of people drank $400 in free beer last year, and the rest was just gravy. It's a truly cool thing. We're going to be doing more podcasts on the Fretboard Summit, including some podcasts with some folks who've attended all 4 that we've done to date. But rest assured, it's a great time. It's like nothing else out there. It's probably the only chance that most of you all who aren't in the industry can meet folks from Collings and Martin and Bob Taylor, Taylor Guitars, and Andy Powers, and all these people you've read about day in and day out under one roof. It's pretty magical. I put a lot of effort into it. I'd love to see some of you there. And before we get to my chat with Sofia, I just want to thank our sponsors beyond the Fretboard Summit and beyond the Fretboard Journal magazine. They are StewMac. StewMac's going to be at our Fretboard Summit. They're also going to be giving away, from what I understand, one of their amp kits and building tube amps while we watch at the Fretboard Summit. Also on hand at the Fretboard Summit is going to be Lutherie legend Dan Erlewine. And right now they're offering Dan Erlewine's books autographed on their website. I'm going to include a link in the show notes. Even if you're not a luthier, that's just a piece of history you should all go get. Seattle's own Mike and Mike's Guitar Bar are sponsoring the show once again. Their YouTube channel continues to deliver. If anybody out there hasn't subscribed yet, please do so. And if you ever find yourself in Seattle, go to their showroom. It's in the Fremont neighborhood. They've got a full-service repair department. It is a very cool place to hang. We are also brought to you by Stringjoy Strings, where you can get your first order for 10% off just by using the promo code Fretboard when you check out. Isotope is sponsoring the podcast once again. Use the discount code FRET10. If anybody out there is already in the Isotope workflow, they've got RX11 now, the latest and greatest. This is a great way to repair any files that just need a little more TLC than you can do on your own. Great noise reduction software and so many bells and whistles. And then last but definitely not least, our friends at Peghead Nation are sponsoring the podcast once again. You can get your first month free or $20 off of any annual subscription with the promo code Fretboard when you check out. Whether you want to sound like Maybelle Carter or learn bluegrass music or learn mandolin or any number of other things, they have you covered. Best of all, a lot of familiar faces on the Peghead Nation website to anyone who's listened to this podcast or read our magazine. You'll see folks like Matt Munisteri and Taya Gherkin and all these folks that we've celebrated for years now, all teaching on their website. It's a truly cool thing. Again, Peghead Nation. And then if you really want to be my best friend, we have a Patreon for this podcast, patreon.com/fretboard_journal. I'll include a link in the show notes. It's a great way to get videos before they ever get to our YouTube channel. Have a direct line to me if you ever have any questions on guitar buying or anything else. I appreciate all of our Patreon patrons. I hope you'll join us if you haven't yet. And now, without further ado, here is my conversation with Sofia Wolfson. Again, I'm not kidding around, folks. This is like one of my favorite records. It's not a guitar record. It's just a great record. It does have some great guitar playing on it. I hope you'll check it out. Sofia, thank you for being on the podcast. You and I started talking, I guess it was about a year ago. You reached out. You said something that I'm hearing more often lately, which is my dad read your magazine and then I ended up reading it. And you actually wanted to write for us. And just to bring this full circle, you started writing for us, which I'm super grateful for. And your first piece is going to be coming out this summer. But why don't you talk to me about, obviously guitars have been around your home. Like, talk to me about how you got into music. Then we'll talk about your writing. We'll talk about this record and everything.
Sounds good. Yeah. My dad has been a long time Fretboard Journal subscriber. So I remember it in the house since I was in elementary school, probably, which is crazy. Yeah, my dad is a musician. And so there were always guitars in the house. There's like this infamous family home video of me taking my first steps, and it's my dad's at the end of the hall playing Norwegian Wood. And I'm just stumbling towards him like, give me the guitar. Yeah, so there were always guitars, but it definitely wasn't forced on me in any capacity. When I was 6, I was very insistent. I want guitar lessons. I had some like toy guitars up until then that I took very seriously as a toddler. Yeah, so I started taking guitar lessons when I was 6, and I was just totally obsessed with it. I felt very lucky just that there was music in the house all the time. My dad would play a lot with me. My mom is a huge music lover. So from a young age, she started taking me we lived about a mile away from Largo growing up in LA. And so before the little room became a bar, it was just the smaller venue. And so my mom would take me weekly, it felt like, growing up, to see like Mike Viola play and all these amazing LA singer-songwriters. So I just feel very lucky that I was kind of surrounded by music and songwriters from a young age. Yeah, I guess that's where the obsession began.
Yeah. And Largo is such a cool place. I mean, I don't know. I guess I didn't know that the little theater had become a bar, because that's how old I am. Last time I was there, it was still
yes.
There were 2 theaters.
Sometime in high school, when I was in high school, they made it 21 and up, which I was very upset about for about 6 years.
Yeah.
Now I'm thankfully can go back in there.
You started playing music, and then, I mean, I keep wanting to call this new record, which we're going to get to, your debut, but you actually put out a record when you were like 16.
Yeah, so that's an interesting situation, which is I've also been hesitant to call it the debut record because there have been several records before. And I also feel like I'm fighting against, there's this kind of bullshit idea in the music industry that you have to keep kind of redoing your debut until something hits. So I feel like I'm kind of fighting against that. But yeah, I mean, technically this is like the first record because I made a record when I was 15 um, that you can still find on the internet,
Yeah.
but it is no longer streaming. Just because when I listen back to it, I think that is a 15-year-old. Um, but I'm really proud of myself for doing that. It kind of encompasses um, a period of my life that I miss, which is just back when I was completely unfiltered in my songwriting, and songwriting was like my number one passion. And I I think the ego part just like wasn't involved yet, or like the self-consciousness. It was just this time of my life where I was like, music is the only thing I'm good at, and like I need to be doing this. So I fundraised a lot to make it. I got to work in like a really nice studio that was like a family friend of a friend. Um, but don't get me wrong, it was really expensive. But I like made all these perks on the GoFundMe where I ended up writing a bunch of personalized songs for people that donated. And yeah, so I look back at that record and I although I personally cannot listen to it anymore, I don't know if anybody could listen to their 15-year-old self. I do think it kind of chronicles a really interesting time in my life that I do miss a lot, which was just when I was not self-conscious or scared or had like imposter syndrome or anything. I was just like, I'm gonna make this fucking record. Oh, can I curse?
Of course. Did you go to
Okay.
did you go to a regular high school?
I did, yeah. Well, actually, kind of. Um, I went to the LA County High School for the Arts. Um, Interestingly, I went for theater, which is funny. Um, I played music growing up. I also did a bit of theater in school. My parents are both in theater in different capacities. And when you have to audition for Loxa, even if you're going to kind of go in a popular music track, you have to kind of enter the school via classical music, which I just wasn't doing in any capacity. And I had been doing theater in middle school. And so all my friends were going to Loxa. And so it was kind of just assumed like, well, I'll just go in via theater. Which again, what's crazy about that high school, it's kind of like the LaGuardia equivalent of like the Fame High School in
Yeah.
LA,
Yeah.
which is you audition into a program, which is so insane to think about. Like you're 13 and you're deciding what artistic discipline you're going to pursue. So that being said, I did my first year basically at the end of my first year at Loxa, I was like, holy shit, I don't want to be an actor. This is terrifying and I don't like this. And so I loved the school a lot. And so I stayed, but how I managed it is the school was quite flexible with me, and I didn't change departments, but I got to take like all of my electives in music, which was great. And so I took like songwriting classes, and I did a lot of film scoring, which was really cool. Um, but yeah, so to answer your question, I went to like a semi-normal high school.
Were there a lot of
Not
like
a totally
famous
normal.
people's kids that went to this high school, or was it just wannabe superstar actors?
Just a few.
Okay.
It is a public school, which was good. There's definitely some artsy private schools in LA that definitely get more of the famous people's kids. Um, But yeah, Loxa was a very interesting experience. My close friends that I still have from high school, we look back, we're just like, was that a real school?
Yeah. And so I got to ask, on this new record, there's a snippet of someone acting at the, is that you?
That is me, yeah.
Okay. We'll get to
Um,
that later. I just wanted to know, how old were you?
yes. Oh, I think I'm like two, maybe two in that video. But
Okay.
Yeah, that snippet really shows you that I grew up with parents in theater.
Yeah. So when you were 50, like we're going back now a decade, when you were 15, 16, and you put out that first record, like who were your big influences? What were you listening to a ton? Yeah, talk to me about that.
Yeah. Back then, I mean Joni Mitchell, obviously. She still is a big one for me, but back then it would have been like Blue, Blue, Blue. Um, like my dad always played me Joni growing up, but I think I had to come to her on my own. And right around the time I was writing that record when I was like 14, 15, I would have been in full Blue mode. Um, and yeah, I grew up with like very formative for me was like the band. I as a kid I would watch The Last Waltz like on a loop. It was my parents never gave me like baby movies. They just gave me that, which is hilarious because if you watch it back, those interviews are not appropriate for like a 3-year-old. Um, but yeah, so I think that first record, it's funny to talk about it with such seriousness because I was like 15. Um, but yeah, it has Joni, the band, the Beatles. It has bands that I was totally obsessed with in middle school, like the Shins.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Um, I was a diehard Shins fan in middle school. I think he's still I mean I think he's still one of the greatest songwriters. Um, yeah, I think that would have been the main ones.
And were you mostly playing acoustic or were you playing electric back then?
Both. Yeah. When I first started playing gigs when I was 13, I played almost exclusively I can't speak acoustic. I played acoustic by myself. And then by sophomore year of high school, around the time that I started making the record, um, I there was like a growing community of kids my age across different schools in LA that we all kind of met and started borrowing each other in each other's bands. And so I think that's when I, Bob Dylan style, went electric.
Now,
Was
you're
probably
talking
around sophomore year.
you said when you were 13 and gigging, and LA is vast and filled with all sorts of places and venues and restaurants and stores. Where is a teenager playing in LA?
That's such a good question. Um, so almost all of us had our first gigs at this Chinese restaurant and venue called Genghis Cohen. Um,
I feel like that name's come up a lot.
oh yeah. Well, I will say they have like revamped it since COVID and now it's like a hip small venue, which is hilarious and amazing. But back then it was like old geezers who had played there for years and like super young children like us because it had to be all ages because it was a restaurant. But what was cool about it is when you walked in, to the left was the restaurant and to the right was the venue separate. Um, so you weren't having to like play over people eating. Um, and then there's some venues that no longer exist that would take, there were tiers, like only a few of them would really take like under 18. And then some of them took us from 18 to 21, but would like usher us in and usher us out it's to make sure we didn't stick around and hang out at the bar. But there was this great venue called Room 5. That was also like a little lounge that for some reason took us at like 14, 15. Which now that I'm thinking about it, it was probably illegal. Um, but yeah, I mean, sadly, some of them are gone because we would just fill it with little teenagers who couldn't drink. So we probably sadly put them out of business.
Did the Chinese restaurant just have like a booker who worked his way into a Chinese restaurant and said, "Let me book cool acts"?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
there was a guy. For some reason, I forget his name, but he didn't even live in LA, which I thought was really interesting.
The story
But
gets weirder and
now,
weirder.
actually,
Yeah.
I know the story just continues to get weirder. But now, actually, I'll give a shout out to my friend Kyle, who runs Sid the Cat in
Okay.
LA, who's a local promoter. Um, He's incredible. He does so much to foster community in LA. He does a really good job of, he'll book a lot of people on tour coming through and then match like local LA artists to support. So he's just been so awesome and has helped me so much. Anyways, I'll give him a shout out because he's recently one of the main people that books Genghis Cohen now,
Oh,
the
wow. Full
Chinese
circle.
restaurant. He's got like an arsenal of venues in LA that he helps book. Um, but yeah, full circle. Now it's hip. You heard it here. Genghis Cohen is hip.
And you're playing throughout high school, ever in bands, or was it always just a solo act?
Pretty much always a solo act in high school. Um, yeah, I would play with other people, but I never joined a band, which is kind of one of my big regrets. I mean, I know it's not too late,
It's not too
but
late.
it's not too late. I do wish in high school I got to have that experience of just like fucking around in a band. Um, but yeah, I've done like since then I've done some I'm making scare quotes, side man work. But I've pretty much done my own thing.
And you college back east?
Yes. So I got into my head that I needed to have like the normal college experience,
Sure.
even though I had spent all of high school being overly serious about having a quote unquote music career, which I hope you can hear that I say with some sarcasm because a lot of this record is about having to unlearn that. Um, yeah, so look, I went to this arts high school. It was awesome, but it was also really competitive. Um, I was really competitive and in my head about grades and academics and things like that. And so I got into some schools and I totally admit now that I chose Tufts in Boston because it was the hardest school to get into that I got into. And I was like, surely I must go there, which I know is also like a byproduct of the flawed academic system in America. Um, and throughout high school, I I not only like worked on music, but I also got really into English. Like one of the main things when I was kind of stuck in this theater program was I got way more into like analyzing the text. Like we have a whole year that's Shakespeare and stuff like that. And so that kind of revealed to me like, okay, I think I want to be an English major. So yeah, I ended up at Tufts University, um, which was great in a lot of ways, but was not the place for me. Um, and I lasted 2 years. And then I made the decision to transfer to a school back in LA so that I could kind of have some more balance where I could study, but I also could pursue music. Because I had a lot of difficulty with the music scene in Boston. I had so many great experiences. Like, obviously, every single tour comes through Boston and all my friends, whenever they would come through, I'd get to go to their shows. And I went to so many amazing local shows like Club Passim is an incredible venue. Um, but I just felt as though I didn't fit in any of the scenes. Like there was an incredible like bluegrass old timey scene, which I love more than anything, but I don't play. And then I was going to these like underground, sweaty, gross post punk shows, which also was awesome, but not what I do. Um, so yeah, I did 2 years there. I learned a lot. Um, and then I came back to LA so that I could finish my degree, but also could kind of like re-enter a music scene alongside it.
I mean, I have to imagine even if you weren't playing music, that must have been jarring just to go from live? I mean, I don't know, maybe you spent time on the East Coast, but just to go from being an LA person to a Boston person.
Yeah, it was really hard.
Yeah.
Though I will say, before I moved, everybody was like, Sophia, you're going to die out there in the winter. And for everybody's like something about everybody saying that, then it's like not as bad. But I mean that the 3:30 p.m. darkness, like that your first year in the winter, it's really hard.
Yeah. You're back east now, though, getting an MFA. Is that correct?
Yes. So it might surprise you to hear that I left LA again. But this time I really wanted to. I think what I was getting at earlier is like the Boston time. Yeah, it wasn't about Boston. It was like this weird competitive academic thing. Um, I did about 4 years in LA after that and started applying to grad programs once I really felt ready to leave LA again. And it's just different too now. Like a grad program, you have to want to do so badly to do it. So yes, I do. I live in Brooklyn now. I moved last August, and I'm getting my MFA in creative writing with an emphasis in fiction.
Okay. Who are your big writers? Who are your big influences?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. Um, yeah, I feel very lucky. I My dad is a writing professor, and so I just grew up with creative writing, not just songwriting, and have always been a really big reader. I grew up with like Raymond Carver, Dennis Johnson, like the classic short story writers, a lot of Kafka, which has been a huge influence on me, and Calvino, who's one of my biggest influences. I love him so much. An English teacher in high school gave me If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, and it made me want to be a writer, and it blew my mind and just totally cracked open my head in terms of like what fiction could do. These days I I have like a couple touchstones that I go back to all the time, and I'm not a huge rereader, but there are a couple people that I reread constantly to try to get inspired or honestly in some ways like mimic them so that I can learn better. Like Ben Lerner. He's If the listeners don't know him, they should stop listening to this and read him right now. He's incredible. I could talk about him all day. He's a poet and novelist and professor and does everything. He lives in Brooklyn too, which is crazy.
Have you met him?
Yeah, no, I have not met him. I I reached out to him right when I moved here and we had like a meeting set that fell through, but my sister, who's also a huge Ben Lerner fan, was just like, Sophia, I don't think you should meet him. Like he's so everything to me that she's like, I'm very worried if you meet him. But he seems great. Yeah. I highly recommend. He's got a trilogy of books that you don't have to read in order, but they kind of all inform one another. And my favorite of the three is his 2019 novel called The Topeka School, which was nominated for the Pulitzer. So he's legit. But his poetry is also amazing. And yeah, people like him or like Maggie Nelson, I'm really interested in people who constantly cross genre. Um, which I kind of see in my own work because I'm always writing songs alongside writing short stories and novels. Um, so I think I'm only kind of connecting now that I think it makes sense that my favorite writers are people that have a bunch of different lanes. Um, yeah,
Do the premises for stories ever become songs or vice versa?
absolutely. Yeah. There are songs that are about things and scenes that are in this novel I wrote and vice versa. You know, it was interesting. My mom was in town the other day and she asked me, do you ever think about writing personal essays. And I said, not really, because I feel so bare and intimate like in the songs, because the assumption is like you're writing about your life. And I've dabbled a bit in songwriting that is fictional, but it doesn't come as naturally to me. So fiction is a space where, even though it is inherently about you in different ways, I kind of get a reprieve from that, and can think through characters. So I guess the answer is yes and no, because certain certain topics have felt too big to just fit into a song, and so they're in longer prose pieces as well. But at the same time, I feel like the fiction I write has a different identity from the songs, because fiction is a space where I feel as though I get to invent a bit more than I do in the songs.
And to graduate from this MFA program, I mean, usually a master's requires some sort of thesis. For this, do you have to like turn in a novel or something
Yes.
massive? Yes. Okay.
Correct. I have to turn in a novel or a collection of short stories.
And what did you do?
Well, I'm in my first year, so I have another whole year. Um, I've essentially, my professors all laugh at me when I go to them and I'm like, I feel so lazy. And then they're like, why don't you tell me the things you told me you're working on? So essentially, I'm working on kind of three books
Of course.
simultaneously,
And a record.
a- as one does. Um, yes, what I will turn in for the thesis will probably be a novel, that I've been kind of slowly picking at. Um, there's a novel I wrote over COVID that kind of just sits on my computer, and I don't know exactly what to do with it, but I'm figuring it out. Um, it's interesting. I'm kind of slowly learning the world of publishing, which is so vastly different from the music industry. Um, so some of the tools and things I've acquired from the last 10 years kind of help, but it also feels like starting over in book land. But I'm also learning that, like music, it's a lot of happenstance. It's a lot of like the person you happen to meet at the party and stuff like that, um, which seems to apply in any arts. Um, but yeah, so I've got a novel that's pretty much finished that I'm figuring out what to do with, um, and I've got a collection of stories and a second novel that I'm kind of working on simultaneously in the program. Um, and yeah, I mean, this summer is kind of the summer I need to figure out what my second year is going to look like, what I'm going to focus on. So I'm hoping it'll kind of reveal itself to me which direction I'm supposed to go.
Okay. You've got a record that's incredible that we need to start talking about.
Thank you. I know I could talk about fiction and writing all day, so now you have to make me talk about music.
I have to say, and I was just blown away by this record. And I don't often say that.
That's so crazy for me to hear, because I've had fretboard since I was a kid.
Well, and you sheepishly sent me an advance to this record. We've been going back and forth, and probably we've never spoken before. We've had probably 100 emails over the last year. You were working at Old Style for Ruben in
Yes,
LA.
I was the sales manager for 2 years,
Yeah.
up until
And
I left for Brooklyn.
the guy who, for anyone listening to this, all those rubber bridge guitars you've read about, he was ground zero for all that. Uh,
Yes, Ruben is the number one. Anyone else is a copy, I'm sorry to say.
it's true. It's true. I've spoken to a couple of guitar makers who act as though they were the originators, and I never disagree with them. I don't want to be rude, but it's like, come on, we know this came from Ruben, and then it went to Blake, and
Yeah,
then yeah,
and I will say Ruben is super honest about the fact that his rubber bridge is inspired by other instruments he's come across in the last 10 years.
yes,
Um, but yeah, oh God, we've had, I mean, I won't. I won't go too far into this, but I just have so many endless funny Rubber Bridge slash old style stories, having been there for a couple years. Um, but I mean, if you have a chance to go visit Old Style, please do. It's such a special little clubhouse of a place.
It is. A- Anyways, you reached out to me. You want to do some writing for the magazine. We had a whole bunch of mutual friends, and and then you a month ago, sheepishly are like, I don't know if this is a conflict, but let me send you my new record. And I turn it on, and I'm like, this is the most. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's also like the most beautifully mixed. And I don't know how you did it, but like your vocals are up front. Whoever mixed it is like, I don't know, maybe you did that. I don't know who did it. I didn't read the
No,
liner
I'll
notes.
give him a shout out. His name is Omar Crouch. He's amazing. Uh, he's a mixer producer in LA, and he mixed the record. Um, he's got a great band called Worth It Purchase. That were a Bay Area band, but now they're an LA band.
I can't think of, I know this is technically not your first record. We established that, but like what an
We can call it that.
what an introduction for people to hear you that like this is I mean I'm blown away by this record. I just got to say.
That's so nice. I've been with these songs for so long that hearing that is makes me feel so good.
Yeah, I mean I mean you said earlier a long time ago when we were first started talking that there was sort of like there was a thought behind this or theme to this record or something, and I should have had you riff on that. But what is it? Talk to me about that, and then we got to talk about the cover and the why you're dressed like a clown.
Yeah, it does. It all goes together.
Okay.
Yeah, so these songs were written in the years following me living in Boston, once I was back home. And so the title comes from feeling really out of place back in LA, which was a really awful feeling because I had felt so estranged and lonely in Boston that there was just this idea of like, okay, well, if I go back to what's comfortable and where my family is and where all my friends are, I'm using air quotes,
Yeah.
um, I'll feel centered again. And instead, I just experienced this long period of feeling really far away from myself. And I had like a few events happen simultaneously. I had like a really bad breakup. I had a mentor exit my life. And it all happened right when I moved back home, like it in the months following moving back home. And so it was just this really weird, awful period. And most of the songs I wrote in that time, and this record is like a record that I tried making over and over again. And this kind of is like the iteration of it that finally got finished. So it wasn't intentional for the record to have like a thesis. Um, it really wasn't until I like saw all the songs and listened through it um, that I saw that I kind of all led back to that idea of like feeling very estranged in your what seems like home. So that's where the title came from. And then the clown is this also goes back to my dad, which I'm just grateful for both my parents. Like, yeah, there was just so much art growing up. I do a lot of my writing I do in response to visual art. And when I was a really young kid, my dad would do this activity with me where we had this huge coffee table book of Edward Hopper paintings. And he'd open it and he'd say, like, what do you think's going on in this painting? Like, write the story of these characters. So ever since I was a kid, this Edward Hopper painting, Sir Blue, um, has been my favorite painting. And I had a really emotional experience in the weeks leading up to COVID. I was in New York and the Whitney had just, I think, reacquired the painting. But I didn't know it was there. I just like came upon it. Um, and so that was really emotional. And yeah, it's just a painting I think about a lot. I like I've written about a lot. Like in undergrad, I wrote like a big final project about it. And so I don't remember the moment that it clicked in my head like, wait, the title is imposing on a hometown. This clown is at like a pretty uh normal city looking scenario, but is so clearly out of place. Um, yeah, I wish I could remember the moment or the conversation that connected those two. Um, but basically I hit up my best friend Ren Evans. She's an incredible photographer. She does both like artistic editorial stuff, and she's also been a really long time touring photographer, and her stuff is so amazing. Um, and I really don't like being in front of the camera. But she kind of talked me through it and she was like, it's got to be you. Um, so we recreated the painting essentially. The cover is just me, but we did a whole shoot where we recreated the Hopper painting. And there's some cute little Easter eggs in it, like some of my guitar students are in it. My mom's in it. Uh, yeah, and there's, clowns have been with me for a long time, which was not intentional, but yeah, there's like a really old music video when I'm like 17, and my friend Charlie Hickey, who's a songwriter,
Yeah.
plays this French painter, and he's painting me as a clown. And it's not in this room, but in my other room, I have the painting of me as a clown. So it's not intentional, really. It's just kind of this image that's followed me for a long time. But I think it makes sense for this record because the songs are about me feeling super disjointed and out of place and like I don't belong and like I'm in everybody's way. And the imposter syndrome was like up to a 10 when I moved back to LA. And so I feel like the clown imagery is me kind of leaning into that.
How long were you actually dressed as a clown for the day of that photo shoot?
Oh, that's that's really funny. We got it done in like a morning. But we shot at a friend's restaurant on a pretty busy street in LA. And I was like, I was so embarrassed. I was just like, get me in and out of this restaurant. And obviously, there was a lot of like, there's huge windows and natural light. So people were walking past, like pointing and looking. But there was one point where I had to run back to the car. Um, and Ren, the photographer, was with me, and there was this older man who was like, what is going on? And before I could say anything, Ren turned to him and said, do you want to be in it? And so there's this series of photos of him like I'm walking past and he's reacting to me in the goofiest way. Um, but no, I only had to be in the clown suit for a brief amount of time, but it felt right.
Yeah.
Maybe it's
And
my final form.
and when did you record this? I mean, we talked a little bit about the thought behind the record and the feelings that went into it, but when did you actually record it? Because you've got an incredible array of musicians, many of whom have been on this podcast before.
Oh yeah.
On
We
this,
could get into that.
yeah, were there were multiple sessions, right?
Yeah. So I kind of mentioned already, like, this was a record that I tried making again and again. And I think I thought at some point I would just like start over and do it, air quote, the right way. But I don't even know what that means. So yeah, the record, I feel really lucky, was pieced together over many sessions with different people. And like, shout out back to Omar who mixed it because we had a lot of meetings about making all these disparate sessions sound like one cohesive record. Um, and I mean, part of that was like the musicians that were on it really made it. But yeah, the actual recording process for these songs after several like home sessions and failed attempts and all that started in 2020, in late 2020. Um, Three of the songs on the record were made with my friends Kane and Malcolm, who have this band called More. Um, and we did those songs together. We recorded both at Kane's dad's house, like in the height of COVID. Um, and when everything opened up a bit more, we got to record at Sound City, which was really crazy and cool. And I still can't believe that was like the height of my imposter syndrome was being there. I mean, we would go like in the middle of the night, when we could access the studio.
So
Um,
who was this? Wasn't Sound City, obviously. Phoebe Bridgers, Tony Berg, Blake Mills, like all funnel through there. Who was it?
mhm.
It wasn't Tony or Blake though on this record, right?
No, no. So Kane and Malcolm, who I mentioned, Tony has worked on their records in the past.
Yeah,
So I think it was just kind of a favor to let us go in
that's
for a
cool.
few hours in the middle of the night. Um, but I mean, I bet people have talked about Blake a lot on this show. Um, yeah, Blake, I can't believe I didn't mention him earlier because obviously there's like a period of my life that's like all the music my dad showed me. Joni and like Lucinda Williams, like a massive one for me. But Blake, basically the first Blake solo record came out when I was in middle school. Um, and that was like it for me. I just remember being like, I can't believe music can sound like this. Um, and I have a distinct memory of while I was making that record when I was 15. Um, I'd get done with the sessions and I couldn't drive yet because I was 15. My dad would drive me. This happened a few times. He'd drive me to the mollusk surf shop
Oh
in
yeah, of
Silver
course,
Lake.
of course.
And I went to all those jams like as a kid. Yeah, I know I know that record is cited like over and over again. And your listeners are probably like, we get it. The Blake solo record is amazing. But yeah, I can't overstate how informative that was to me. Just in terms of like songwriting and guitar playing and production. I mean, everything about that record I think is perfect. Um, and I still listen to it every single time I'm on an airplane and it's about to take off. I have a weird superstition about the Blake Mills solo record, the first solo record. Um, but yeah, that was huge for me. So obviously being in Sound City, I was just like, what am I doing here? Um, anyways, back to the as you can tell, I haven't done a single interview for this record yet.
I'm honored to be your first.
Um, yeah, so some of the songs were in that session. And then as I've like hinted at, like the imposter syndrome and stuff like got the best of me. And there was a period of time I just like had three songs from the record and I was like, I think this is it. Like I don't think it's ever gonna get done.
What were the first
Um,
three?
so the three that I made with Kane and Malcolm were Hometown Hero, which is the first song on the record, Donuts, which is a single that's out, and Wannabe, which is the one song on the record that I co-wrote. I co-wrote with them. Um, and I was really proud of those, but I just, my like depression was at an all-time low, which I know most people experienced in COVID. And I've always loved working with people. I'm not really technologically savvy. I always joke that I like don't have the like home recording bone in my body, which I wish I had. Um, but it just got to a point where like hiring people for stuff um, was feeling impossible. Like I was so in my head, just being like, oh my God, they're lying to me. Like they're, the general they, like, is actually hates this music. And it was really rough. It was really rough time. And I thought I would never finish the record. And then I just had like a big turning point in 2022. Um, like my mental health took a big turn in a positive direction. I like finally admitted that I needed some help and all that stuff, which I, you know, had been denying. I was the kid that was like, I can do everything on my own. Everything is totally fine and I have it under control. Um, so that was like a godsend. And after getting better, I finally got to a point where I was like, look, I'm going to finish the record. It actually doesn't matter what people think of it. Um, I just need to finish it, and I need to take everyone at face value. If they're saying they want to work on it, they want to work on it. Um, so the record kind of had a resurgence in the end of 2022, when I got connected with Gabe Wax, um, who I'd been such a big fan of for so long. Like he made all the Soccer Mommy records. He's worked on Adrian Lanker solo records. Um, and so we did a series of sessions late 2022 into early 2023. And that's when we did six, 5 or 6 more of the songs. And I wasn't really sure how it was going to all fit together, but I mean, there is like an LA sound and it's my sensibilities. And um, so I think as we were going along, I kind of had this in the back of my head. I was like, I think this can fit together with the stuff I already started. Um, and a couple of the other songs kind of came either like done at home, or I have a friend, Evan Vidar, who we've done like some experimenting together, and one of the songs came out of that. So it really is hodgepodge together, but I feel like I owe it almost all to Omar, who mixed it, who did such a good job of um, taking, Gabe Wax had mixed one of the songs and we really loved the way it sounded. And so Omar kind of took that as a blueprint and made the whole record sound what I hope is cohesive.
Oh my God, it
Um,
sounds great.
Thank you.
I mean, was this a
Uh,
situation where you were talking about how you were kind of in a dark place? Was this a situation where, I mean, there's so many people on this record, like Mason Stoops and Meg from Hand Habits, where all these people like telling you all along for years, like, when can we make this record together? When can I help you? And you were just like had blinders on and couldn't see the forest through the trees.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I, my sick narrative was like nobody needs another singer-songwriter. And also this was during the rise of like TikTok and stuff, which I don't understand, and I totally applaud musicians I know who have cracked it, but it just doesn't feel authentic to me to be on it, like doing little dances to my depressing ass songs. But yeah, I mean, I feel I owe it all to growing up in LA and being surrounded by the most amazing people. Like one of my closest friends is Harrison Whitford, who was definitely like one of the people that you're saying, was were people like you got to finish this, and Harry was one of the main ones that over the years was like you have to finish this. He was just like I don't care how you feel about it anymore. Like you have to finish it. He's been so amazing. Um, yeah, yeah. Now you're making me look back on it and be like, no, there were people who were saying like, yeah, you have to finish this, but I think that I just had this sick narrative in my head, but I'm really glad I did. I did finish it.
It's super hard to delegate. I've learned that.
Oh, it's
It's
so hard and
yeah.
especially when it's like your friends and all the emotions get involved, but yeah, I mean, I Meg came on board when I was in the period of my life in which I was a little bit healthier. I think pre getting better me would have, I've been such a huge Meg fan since high school. Like I have this memory of being at Outside Lands in high school, and there was like this smaller side stage on the way to a bigger stage, and Kevin Morby was playing. This would have been like 2014,
Wow.
2015,
Yeah.
and seeing Meg play and just having this moment, like I'd played guitar already, but having this moment of just like holy shit, like I need to do that. um so Meg came into the picture in the Gabe sessions, when I just like finally worked up the courage to ask, and they were totally down, which still blows my mind. So there's Meg all over the record, which like you can't see me, but I'm like blushing. I still cannot believe that happened.
My two favorite tracks, and they're kind of a yin yang thing, are Half
Ooh.
Heart and New Year's Eve. Those are my
Oh,
two.
sick.
Yeah.
Those are both Gabe. Those are both Gabe produced tracks. Yeah. Half Heart was one that had a lot of trouble cracking. Like the band would play it too at live shows. And it just felt so different from all the others. And Gabe was the person that was like, I think your inclination to like make it into something it's not is not right. Like we should just keep it like a fucking banger, and not try to like add too much sauce to it. And I was really resistant for a while, but I'm really happy with how that one turned out. Yeah, I'm glad you like the angriest song on the record. Um, yeah, I mentioned earlier, like kind of the things that happened simultaneously was like moving back home, like this massive heartbreak and losing a mentor. And that song kind of chronicles the night that I like got back to LA and like basically this is so like being 19, it's crazy. But there
You're
was
so
like
young.
this I know, but this feels like this chapter feels like so much younger. I know I'm still young. But yeah, they're my like person at the time who I thought I was still kind of with. I like walked into his gig and he had a new girlfriend.
Oh.
Dun dun dun.
Hmm.
Um, and so I was really angry. And I find usually that writing songs immediately after something happens is not the way to go. Like you need to process it. But that's the one song that kind of stood the test of time. Um, yeah. And then New Year's Eve was a song that came a little bit later. And that's a song I like picked at for a long time till I felt like I'd gotten it right and had demoed and recorded in different iterations. And I really like what Gabe did with it. Yeah. And Jorge Balbi, who plays drums on the record, that's like his shining moment if you listen to it. I I'm not a drummer, so I was like, I think I want it to be like this kind of thing. And I kind of like mimed and sang it for him. And I was like, he's not going to understand. And then he just killed it. So, um, yeah.
What would it? It feels dumb to talk about gear with a record that's like. I mean, it's all about the music, but let's hear what gear you used on it.
Sure, of course. Um, Let me think. Um, Acoustic overall on the record is my 1964 J45, which I love dearly. I got it at Norm's Rare Guitars in LA, but it has a really great story, because I had become around like age 16, I'd become really obsessed with J45s pre 65. Um, and everywhere I went, I looked for them, but they all were like $3,500, which I could not do as a 16-year-old. And I was at Norm's with my dad, and they had like 20 of them, from like 60 to 64. And I picked one up randomly and I started playing it, and I look at the tag and I'm like, it was like $1,400 or something. I was like, what? And all of them were like $4,000. And it just so happened that they had done a headstock repair on this one, um, which I was 16. I didn't care about, and I still don't care about. It sounds great. But there's actually a great story, which is Mason, who's a friend of the podcast. He was over at the house. He was in my band for a while, and he was over at the house for band practice. And he sees the guitar and he's like, "That's yours?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I got it years ago at Norm's." He's like, "Fuck you. I played that one and I like went to go get the money together and come back a week later and it was gone." Um, so that's the story of how I stole a J45 from Mason Stoops. Um, there's honestly, I wish I knew more about the gear because I didn't record in my space at all. I'm trying to think. There are several rubber bridges, obviously. Um, I own a Tysco Tulip electric rubber bridge that's on the record. But a lot of the rubber bridge on the record is like a parlor from the 50s, like a Stella, um, that we had both at Kane's dad's and at Sound City. Um, I'm trying to think what else. I have like a rinky-dink little German nylon that I got at Old Style that's ended up all over the record. Which I love cheap guitars that sound good. I think it's the greatest. And that's kind of like a lot of the Old Style thing. Um, and then all the bass on the record is Gabe owns my favorite bass in the whole world, which is a Hagstrom, like with the plasticky part in the middle. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. I love that bass so much. It feels so good. Um, and I'm like cringing because I wish I knew more about what was used on this record. I'm trying to think. It's been so long for most of it. But I mean, a lot of it was just like whatever was around, which I know people don't like to hear. They want to hear that very specific things were used. But um, yeah, I mean, I feel like everyone I worked with, especially Gabe, has such a specific way of recording things. Um, that it almost doesn't matter exactly what the instrument is. Um, but I mean, I can tell like some cool stories. Like when we were at Sound City, we did a all some of the background vocals on Hometown Hero. I sang like we mic'd a sitar and I sang into the sitar
Oh,
so
yeah.
that we'd get like some ambient kind of string noise going. Like we did shit like that. Um, I'm trying to think. Of course, like the second we're not on the call, think of things. Oh, what is that little acoustic thing Blake plays that's not a ukulele?
Is
Is
it
it
a
a
tipple?
tipple?
Yeah, he has a tip. I mean, I haven't seen. We photographed that like over a decade ago. I guess he probably still has it. Yeah.
Well, we did play the tipple.
Okay.
Um,
That's a hard instrument to tune.
oh yeah. The tipple is on the record. The tipple made the record.
What song is the tipple on?
The tipple is on Hometown Hero. There's kind of this like cacophonous chorus that
Yeah.
has some tipple, it has some like gently tapping a glass and stuff like that. This is making this record sound like a bizarre ambient record.
I
It's
mean, it's a
not.
fantastic record. It's gonna be huge, I think, and it might be
Oh
the most
God.
listened to tipple song. I mean, of the
Wow.
decade, right? At
Bring
least.
the tipple back.
I mean, that's. Did you have to tune it, or somebody tune it for you? Those are a pain in the
I
ass.
I feel I feel very lucky. Somebody else was playing the tipple. I love to play guitar, but I also was surrounded by like the greatest guitar players ever on this record. So I was like, you want to play the tipple? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go for it.
The one time Stephen Merritt of the Magnetic Fields came to the Fretboard Journal, we were talking about ukuleles. He played the ukulele, and we were talking about amplification. And I had a like Yasuma fake Martin tipple from the 70s, like a lawsuit tipple, as though there were lawsuit era tipples. And I just gave it to him, and he's
That's
like,
so
"What?"
funny.
And I'm like, if anyone's going to ever use this, you take it." And I don't know if he ever took, I don't
Absolutely.
know if he ever did anything with it, but I gifted Stephen a tipple. So it's his problem now, not mine.
I love the idea of a lawsuit tipple. I'm gonna be like lawsuit baritone ukulele.
You're obviously a gearhead. Have you found your store in back east, like your hangout spot?
Not really.
Oh, that's sad.
If anybody has any recommendations for me, I've definitely been around. I've seen some cool spots, but I don't know. I was so spoiled with old style, that I don't know if I'll ever be able to replicate that feeling. We have one kind of down near me in South Brooklyn. I mean, it's not South Brooklyn, but it's not far from me, called Orphan Guitars, which is in Carroll Gardens. They seem to have some cool kind of oddities and things. And I played a little in store right when I moved here, which was sweet. Um, but yeah, I don't feel like I've really found it yet. Everything here is so goddamn expensive. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's on the higher end, but they featured prominently in our next issue. I feel like Tom Crandall would probably be your jam, TR Crandall.
Hmm. Yeah, I have a friend who used to work there. I haven't been over there yet, but I have to go.
I know Margaret Glassby goes there a lot, and so I don't know. I don't know. But it's higher end. It's
She's
not like
she's the goat.
kind of. Yeah.
Oh,
Have you met
I
her?
love her. No, she's another one. Like, I had my phases in middle school and high school. Like, so if middle school was the Shins, um, her first record came out when I was a senior in high school, and I was so obsessed with it to the point that the CD actually got stuck in my car. And so basically on my commute to high school every day for a long time, that was the only thing I could listen to, but it also was the only thing I wanted to listen to. Of
I gotta introduce you. Of
Oh my God, really? I would die.
course. I'm gonna connect you two after this call.
Oh man, wow.
We've talked about your writing, we've talked about your music. You've also done your first piece for the Fretboard Journal, which I'm very happy about. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about who you interviewed?
Sure, I would love to. um, I got to interview Adrian Lanker, which I cannot believe. I must sound so crazy at this point in this episode because I'm like, I've been the fan of this person for forever, but I truly am a huge Big Thief fan. Um, yeah, I got to interview Adrian right before her newest record came out. Um, and it was amazing. She was in New York, so we got to do it in person. Um, and we sat and we talked about guitar for a while and songwriting. And I will say that leading up to it, in the month leading up to it, I took her School of Songwriting course, which if you do a School of Song, I would recommend everybody check it out. My friend Stephen Van Betten started it with some people in COVID. And um, it's basically adult music classes in the coolest way. There's core classes, so like you can always take like music theory for songwriting or stuff like that, and then they always do a guest songwriter lecturer. And in January of this year, it was Adrienne, and the class was incredible. I mean, she is truly one of the most gifted songwriters and also teachers. Um, and it came to me at like a really dark time. And so it was very inspiring. So I got to talk to her a bit about that, about the record, about her gear, which she's got a lot of really interesting stories about how guitars have come her way. And she has guitars that were made especially for her. And then we got to like play a little, which was crazy. Um, she's awesome. Yeah, that record is just so beyond. I mean, just in terms of her songwriting and her guitar playing, and the production is gorgeous, and it all just goes together so well.
Well, thank you for doing that for us.
Oh
It's a
my, it
great
was my
story.
honor.
Oh, we're gonna have you. We're gonna sign all your heroes. We're gonna have you interview them all for us.
And I just have to like drug myself into pretending that I'm chill.
That's fine. You did a great job. Final question. I mean, this record is called "Imposing on a Hometown," and you're kind of bi-coastal now. And like, what does feel like home? Is it still LA?
Oh man. Well, I will say that I don't feel the way I felt when I wrote the record. Um, like I do love LA, and I kind of had to rebuild my life there, which I think is, anybody who's an adult who moves back to where they're from has to do. And so I have like a new relation to LA that is still I still have so much love for LA, but I don't know. I live in Brooklyn now. I didn't know what to expect when I moved almost a year ago, and I feel really at home here. Which feels really good because I was moving around a lot. before Brooklyn. And I think I owe a lot of that to the music scene here, um, as well as feeling really at home in my grad school program. Um, but Brooklyn just has this really comforting, cool thing happening right now in music. Um, I have this friend group of songwriters who are just like the most talented people I've ever met and are also so egoless about it. Which is so refreshing because LA can be a total mind fuck of competing
Sure.
egos and not everyone, like, but yeah, everyone here is just so like selfless and we all go to each other's gigs and um it feels really about the music, which is something I feel like I've been looking for a long time because I want to play music for the rest of my life, but I don't like the music industry is such a fucked thing that I've been kind of like reassessing what that means for me. Um, and I want to do it my way and and not give into the whole like TikTok and all that, which again totally works for people and that's awesome. Um, but yeah, there's just this squad here that it feels really about the music. Which is like it's just so inspiring. Um, and I also feel like some of the artists that I'm listening to right now, like McGee and Dijon, are also on a much larger scale working against that as well. Like it feels really about the music. It's not about like the whole internet thing. Which I'm praying that means we're taking a turn in the post-COVID music industry. But yeah, shout out the Brooklyn music scene because it's been really inspiring and has kind of given me my groove back.
That's cool. That's super cool.
Yeah,
Are you going to tour?
I would love to more than anything. Uh, but getting those is hard. I I'm doing an LA album release show at the beginning of June, and then I'm doing a New York album release show at the end of June. But besides that, no other no other me shows on the books. I guess if you're listening to this and
Hey, come
you,
to the Fretboard Summit.
oh yeah,
Come in August.
Cameron was telling me about that shindig. I would love to.
All right. We'll get you a set.
Okay, sweet. Oh my God. See? Okay, great. Just got
And I
another show.
interrupted you. You were about to say if anybody out there wants to book you.
Yeah, if anybody's got a little small town or something and they want to come to my show, I guess I'll come there and I'll sing my little songs.
Yeah, please. And please come to Chicago.
I've never been to Chicago, so
You'll
I'm
love it.
in.
All right.
Great.
Cool. We'll make it happen. Sophia, I'm not blowing smoke. I mean, this record is going to blow minds. It's really amazing.
As long as it's blown your mind, that's all I could ever ask for.
Thank you, and thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored, as I've had fretboard since I was a kid, so I truly cannot believe it.
I'm glad we had a very small part in this record and all that you do.
Sweet, thanks.
All right, that was my chat with Sofia Wolfson. What'd you think? Let me know. Leave us a review over on Apple Podcasts or drop me a note at podcast@fretboardjournal.com. We have a whole bunch of new podcasts coming out. There's a new Luthier on Luthier out now. We just did a new Truth About Vintage Amps podcast, and we have a lot of other surprises going on. So follow us and stay tuned. And thanks as always for tuning in to the Fretboard Journal podcast.